Welcome to Philosophy Hall, a place where we discuss all things academic. Dennis, it's great to see you again. Would you like to say something about our project, what we're doing here?
Yeah, what are we doing here exactly, Arden? When we initially discussed this format, I was thinking how I did not grow up in the American academic system at all. And so when it was time to go to college, my parents did go to college, but not in this country. So I really didn't know anything about American universities. And they're different from European universities. It's a unique and a really vibrant, it's a huge system. There are many universities compared to the rest of the world. And so I didn't know much about it. And I would say to this day, there are things that I wish somebody just explained to me, but I was afraid to ask. So one of those things that we wanted to talk about today was just the various ranks and titles of researchers and teachers that you may encounter in your journey through academia. And that's regardless of whether you're an undergraduate student or graduate student or you're in faculty, maybe this will fill in some gaps. That's what I was thinking for today. What about you? How did it work for you? Did you went to school in Canada? Is that right?
I did. I went to school for my undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto, and then I moved to the United States for grad school. And I did find it to be culturally a little bit different. And the system of the
Mm,
university, although similar in certain ways, also did have some differences. And because I had never paid much attention as an undergrad to the various kinds of academic ranks that my professors had, it was a whole new experience to try to parse what does this mean? What level of dependability do I have from this faculty member? How much job security do they have? What are the pressures that they might be under that I don't appreciate as the student? And that became much more important during graduate school time for me. So, when we think about what are the different academic ranks and for whom does it really matter, right? I think obviously it matters very much to professors, and I think we'll get into that in our conversation. Why does it really matter to professors? But it does matter to students to some extent. And I think the farther you go in your academic studies, the more it will begin to matter for you as you yourself begin ascending this lifelong career ladder. So, Dennis, do you want to tell us what are just some of the names of the ranks?
okay, so I was thinking what's a good way to think about this. So first, let's just think about the big division. So in the university, obvious things. You have undergraduate students, you have graduate students, you have faculty, and we'll talk about what that means. And then you have staff and administration, right? So there are people and all those, maybe they're roughly, I would say, equivalent in size. They're all major constituencies of the university. So there are many people who are taking classes. There are many people who are teaching the classes and supporting the teaching of the classes. And then there is many people who just make the place run. Everything from maintaining the facilities to creating websites to doing the budget for the university and doing high level planning on the level of the president. If we open up the hood of the university vehicle, then we begin to see this major distinctions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's completely right.
Students, faculty, staff. Okay. Now,
Yes.
within faculty, let's say, who might you encounter in the classroom? So now, in some departments, you may even see undergraduates teaching a class. Like, for example, in computer science, there'll be like teaching assistants, TAs, or in some places, some fancy places, they call them teaching fellows. So you'll see some teaching assistants who may be undergraduate, right? They're helping to teach a section for a professor. You'll see teaching assistants who are graduate students, and you'll have the main instructor of record, sometimes it's called, and then there'll be a graduate student assistant. Now, some of the more senior graduate students, as they go through their years and oh, what should I say, as
Oh,
they mature in their career, something like that, they may propose their own courses and they may teach their own courses. So there'll be a graduate student who is the instructor of record. We're going up to the students, right?
okay.
You may encounter students teaching your class. Please treat them nicely. It's part of their educational experience is to also instruct. and they're likely not getting paid very much for it because it's considered to be part training, part service to the university.
Right. In fact, it might be expected of their particular program that they would do this teaching and that any compensation that they get is just part of their program that they're doing.
How does that work? Like, it's part of your so when a graduate student gets admitted into the program, let's say in English or in sociology, they get funded for so many years, right? A PhD will be funded, but then part of their funding conditions will be, okay, in the last 2 years, you actually teach so many courses, or you TA for so many courses.
Yes. At Columbia, in the English department, for example, it is expected that students will teach courses for the writing program. There are opportunities at a more senior level to develop your own class, and that's a competitive process. So you should know that students are teaching their own class. There's also the opportunity to be a teaching assistant or a more senior professor's large lecture, and that's considered a kind of training opportunity where
Okay.
the student will model themselves on what the more senior faculty member is doing and get some experience in that way, and then will then go on to become the instructor of record in their own classroom further on down the line of their career.
Well, how does a you mentioned like they won how I forgot how you said it, but basically not every graduate student gets to teach. So they propose a class and then a class may be chosen. So it's a little bit of a privilege to get to actually teach your own class at the
Yes,
graduate level.
yes. A class of your own design, certainly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a privilege to be able to do that. And it would be for undergraduates listening in, it would be somebody who's near the end of their PhD program. They may have
Mm.
been in the PhD program for 5 years at that point.
So you can trust them.
They're very experienced, right? They already
Right.
have a master's degree. They've been in the PhD program for several years. They've probably already taught other classes. So by the time they're teaching a course of their own design, they're really going on their own. Yeah.
And we should say this depends on the university. So different universities have different sort of funding structures. It also depends on the field. For example, I know in computer science where often you have classes. I taught one class in computer science where there were 400 students or something. And for 400 students, we have just a ton of graduate teaching assistants. And graduate teaching just happens more often in some fields. And it happens less often in fields where the courses are a little bit more like discussion based. It's not so much about like grading homework. We're in English,
Yeah.
media studies, philosophy. There's not. It's different type of homework as opposed to economics or computer science, where you really need like a large teaching staff to staff a course. So it'll vary a little bit by field and by university.
Yeah. Especially for PhD students in the sciences, they may not have any teaching requirement at all as part of their funding package.
Yeah, and they're
And
doing
any
research in the
teaching
lab.
any teaching that they do is discretionary and probably uncompensated.
The academic life in general, it's not the most lucrative thing you can do in life. And partly it's because we love what we do. We love research. We love the university. We love being in the library. And a lot of stuff we do is because we are just trying to foster a sense of community and continue that tradition of education. And it's not necessarily, let's call it transactional. It's not necessarily that everything that I do, I expect compensation. I'm not billing people for my time, which is, it sounds all like nice and fuzzy. The downside of that also, it's very easy to just do a lot of stuff and your time can be filled up with advising, with writing letters of recommendation, with research, with going to events, with organizing events, but you're essentially are there in part because of your own goodwill and because you are building a community, you're supporting other people. So I think it's important to understand for students as education is becoming increasingly transactional. I paid this much, and so I expect this particular thing. You should expect something from the university. You are paying for a degree, you should expect an excellence of education. But in terms of individual people, understand that many things that your instructors are doing, they're doing it because they love it. And they're doing it because they really want to support you and they want to make you into a better student, into a better researcher. And they're willing to stay after. They're willing to be late for picking up the kids so that they can have a conversation with you or organize a talk or something like that. And I think it's important to keep that spirit the university is like the original open source project. So we're there. We constantly contribute for the good of the system, of the community, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. So we
That's
talked about the grad student instructors,
hmm
teaching fellow or teaching assistant, and then they could become an instructor of record later on. What about once people have completed a PhD and become a faculty member? What changes?
Okay. So now this is the most probably opaque part of it. So really pay attention here. And I think this is the talk I wish I had much earlier in as even as an undergraduate. So when you apply, this is also in the United States. When
Yes.
you apply for a position, there's something that's called a tenure track position. And the tenure track position means that you're going to be hired into a department. The tenure line is located in the department. So you're going to be hired, you're going to be working there for several years. And then if you do well, if you research well, if you teach well, you have good reviews, you're going to essentially join the faculty, join the body of a faculty with the full voting rights and responsibilities. But before that, for several years, you're in a trial period. I would say, it's similar to a partner at a law firm or something like that, where when you make partner, okay, now you can vote, you're more of a permanent part of that place. But before that can happen, you are on this trial period. And depending on the universities, so some places at Columbia and other research universities, it often takes anywhere between 5 to 7 years. So when you first join the faculty of a department, you are on a probationary period, right? And that probationary period, you sometimes it's yearly. At Columbia and other places, you have a review in your first year, in your third year, and in your fifth year. And each time you have to meet certain requirements for how much you're publishing, and you have to maintain excellence in your teaching. And if you manage to pass those reviews, the whole of the department votes and they essentially renew your contract, right? So after the first year, they go, okay, good job. We'll keep you for another couple of years. Please come back. After the third year, they'll say, you did pretty well. Make sure, don't forget your research. And then you go into your fifth year, you go through another review. And each time it's a significant process. The whole department meets behind closed doors. In public university, this may be more of an open process, but in private universities, it's quite opaque. You can't really request records. We as faculty, before we get tenure, we don't know what the discussion is. But behind closed doors, it's a true sort of discussion of somebody's work. Your materials get reviewed, your publications get reviewed, your teaching evaluations get reviewed, and then you get either renewed or not. And this process ends when you get tenure. Now, tenure, I thought I made this mistake as well. I thought it means 10 years. So, like 10 year, but it's not tenure. It's tenure, tenure, right? Tenure. So when you get that final sort of promotion, you then move ranks from assistant to associate professor
Yeah.
and associate professor with tenure. And basically, associate professor and higher, that's somebody who already they've made partner, if you will, and now they have full voting rights. As faculty, they get to vote on if there's any curriculum changes, if you want to change anything about how the department works. When you're hiring new people, you get to vote. You basically become much more a part of the institution and of the department. Does
So
that make
let's
sense?
That's great. So let's say a student is encountering a faculty member who's teaching their class. If it is an assistant professor, then this person has not yet earned tenure and they're in this trial period where they're being reviewed pretty frequently by their department. And then an associate professor or a full professor or a professor emeritus, which is a retired professor, who still maintains a teaching relationship with the university.
Mm,
If they're one of those ranks of professors, then this person has quite a degree of stability. They've made partner in the university and they're there
right.
their career. What should students be aware of for faculty members who are, as we like to say, on the tenure clock, who are trying to get tenure? What are some of the competing demands on their time?
So what is, maybe if you could like, what is on the clock mean?
Well, on the clock, you have a certain amount of time from your hiring date and to the time where you come under review for tenure. So it's not really 10 years. In fact, it's less than 10 years. It's usually about 7 years.
Yeah,
Might differ depending on the institution.
5 and 7 are usually often one or
Right.
the other.
So that's a clearly defined probationary period. And then at the end of that, there's a decision about whether you continue on potentially for life or whether you have to go and find another appointment at a different university. So
Yes, yes, and
when people are first hired, there's a kind of pressure to meet all of their benchmarks, teaching, research, and service.
yeah, so for example, in the humanities, often either one book or two books, or you have to complete though at least two books before you can get tenure. It may
That's
be
very institution dependent, though.
very
That's
institution,
very
yes.
institution dependent. Some people get tenure at institutions without a single book.
Yes, yes. And also some fields are more article driven fields, and it may be whatever it is, like 16 articles. But I'm trying to reiterate the pressure. And sometimes we say junior faculty, meaning faculty who is not tenured. So junior faculty have a pressure to publish, and they're trying to meet a specific target depending on the institution. Now, I think where you're going with this, why should students care? Like, you're being taught by assistant professor or associate professor or professor without any modifiers, right? So this is levels of seniority. Why would you care? How does that impact you from the perspective of an undergraduate and from a perspective of a graduate student?
So I think for an undergraduate, it may not matter all that much. Whoever is teaching an undergraduate class will have passed a certain benchmark and they're fully qualified to be there. I think it becomes more important for graduate students, especially
Mm,
in a process of choosing an advisor or a
right,
dissertation committee at the PhD level. So, like a master's thesis advisor or a PhD thesis advisor or other members of your PhD dissertation committee where you want to think a little bit carefully about who will have bandwidth and time to invest in your mentoring,
right,
who you can count on to be there in 5 years as you finish up your PhD. I think that's
right.
yeah,
That's an important point. There is a simple barrier here, is that somebody who's not tenured might not be there next year. And if you're an undergraduate, you're there for 4 years. If you're a graduate student, let's say you're there for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, hopefully around
great.
5. But point is, you want to make sure that the person who is working with you is around to support you and to write recommendation letters and supervise your thesis. So with junior faculty, you don't always know that they're going to be around next year because it may be that they're getting another job, or it may be they haven't passed their review, or if they're more contingent faculty, if their job is more precarious, if they're a visiting instructor, or there's various appointments that are made just year to year, but that also means that you can't really expect them to support you past their contract, right? That makes sense. So if they're only there for 1 year.
So this leads us into talking about contingent faculty. All of the publishing about the state of the university always stresses this
Right.
is a growing trend. Over 50% of faculty or contingent faculty is, typically mentioned. So what is contingent faculty? Do you want to tell us?
So contingent faculty is the faculty whose contract, they're basically on a yearly contract, and often they will have ranks such as lecturer or senior lecturer. They don't have job permanence, and they may not have the full voting privileges of a tenured faculty member, and they may be represented in the administration or in the faculty senate in a different way. And so the word here is contingent, right? The other word is precarious. So think about, in a weird way, the academic career is more similar to sports or acting rather than law or medicine. Is that there are so many people who are willing, this is such a cool place, and the job is so great, right? Just to do research, to write, to be with other smart people, is that people are willing to do it for not a lot of money. Most people who are in the university, they could go outside of the university and probably have a more job security and probably much greater salaries. The universities know this. They know that they're that people love them, and so they don't have to pay as much as the market. And therefore, there are many jobs in the university that are precarious. It's people who are being renewed year to year. And think about the various things that could happen. You didn't get along. Like I have so many stories of people who were in my graduate cohort and then they end up teaching language and they're going year to year. And there's somebody senior who for some reason doesn't like them. So they really try to make their life difficult to push them out. The contract doesn't get renewed. There are visa issues or something like that. All sorts of weirdness come with precarity. When you work, when you are not guaranteed your contract to be renewed, then your job is often in danger. You don't feel as secure, right?
Yeah, that's right. So you should know if someone has a title of adjunct professor, that is a position that works well if the person has another part of the career that they're doing. And then that means they come and teach one class for the university. So you can imagine if someone was like a superstar lawyer and then they come and teach one class for the law
Right.
school, that works very well because the main part of their salary that they're drawing on is in their other job. And then the adjunct thing is just an extra bonus. But what becomes difficult is when people are trying to cobble together a career by taking on multiple adjunct jobs at different universities
Mm,
in order to make up a living wage, which is incredibly difficult. So this is why we say precarious. Not only are these contracts not guaranteed to be renewed, and on an annual basis, the person has to fight for their renewal, but more than this, they don't often provide enough of a salary to constitute a living wage. Okay, what does this mean for students? I think you just be mindful of the title of the person that you're dealing with. It reminds me of our doctor versus professor conversation of before. You might detect a different kind of pressure on your faculty members who are not
right.
assistant professor, associate professor. They may have financial pressures. They may have other responsibilities to other institutions or other parts of their life where they're trying to earn a living. It and this is one point of similarity with an assistant professor because they are fighting for the continuance of their job. That is a certain degree of pressure on them that they have to meet. So it does mean that if a professor who's a contingent faculty is teaching a course, teaching evaluations really matter, and they matter even more because they were not liked by their students. Then what incentive does the university have to renew them?
So it's not the best dynamic that just happens to be a side effect of the systems. If you're tenured, that means your job is protected. It's partly that institution came out of the idea that people should be able to do research without external political pressure. And also uh, you should be able to take risks in your research. There might be a research program like you're doing something that may not pay off for many years. So you want that sort of protection so you can engage in a long-term, significant, deep research, and then you can come out with some findings. You want a little bit of isolation from the pressures. But reversely, that also means you're slightly isolated from the pressures of, let's say, bad student reviews. So sometimes, look, most of our colleagues, you have senior faculty who constantly win teaching awards, who just go above and beyond to support students. But there are some who are very, well, let's be charitable. They're busy researching.
Yeah.
Besides teaching, we're writing, we're researching, we're doing service for the field. We review articles, no compensation either. We review grants. We write recommendation. It's really just nurturing a community that just comes with this profession. But it also means that when you, let's say, have a bad review from a student, it doesn't have a direct impact on your career because you're no longer evaluated on a yearly basis. And somebody who is in a more precarious position, they actually, if their reviews are bad, they could be not renewed for this purpose. The person who is most precarious is also most dependent on a good relationship with their student. So that also means I think we're trying to get to the point of why should you care? So first of all, just understanding kind of what the workload is and what you can expect from various ranks and from people in different stages of their career, I think it helps you navigate what kind of expectations should you have. But it also Look, I'm trying to make just a simple point to just be nice to contingent faculty, be nice to folks who are not tenured, be nice to folks who are renewed yearly, because from a student's point of view, a review is a review. It's all the same. For this class, I didn't have a good experience in this class, so I'm going to be super nasty in a review. And for some professors, it does nothing. Like nobody is reading that, or they just read it and they're like, I don't care. I'm just going to
Yeah.
continue doing. But then somebody else is being evaluated under a microscope where every review is being read by the whole faculty. And they're going, why your reviews have slid and your average went down and you're not maintaining your average. So therefore, we're not renewing you. So I think it helps students to understand both the impact of their interactions with faculty, but also the kind of expectations they may have from their instructors.
I have another thought, which is what do students get that is different from someone in a junior phase of their career compared to someone in a
Mm,
senior role? So I have a couple thoughts on this.
yeah,
I think a faculty member who's in a more junior phase, they are hungry, right? They're really highly motivated. And
yeah,
what that means is that they're deeply connected to what's happening in their field. They might have completed
right.
their PhD pretty recently and really know, be up to date on the most interesting conversations at the vanguard of their field. And they might be pretty energetic and enthusiastic because they're highly motivated. So that's a real positive sign for junior faculty. On the other hand, they may have demands drawing them in many different directions, and they may have a degree of unreliability in their job security. And so you have to bear this in mind as well. They probably have demands on many different aspects of their time. And as for tenured faculty, more senior faculty, they have gone through this grueling and rigorous process. They have earned their place at the university. They now have job protection so that they can take more risks in their research. They may have a sort of longer term form of thinking. Those are just my impressions of what each of the ranks gives a student in terms of advising. What do you think?
Yeah. It's hard to give a one size fits all because I think there are various common patterns that happen. For example, it could be that the more senior person has more responsibilities, administrative responsibilities. They're serving on university committees, they're being a dean. We have quite a bit of committee work that just goes into running the university, disciplinary committees, hiring committees, grant writing committees. So it may be that they have less time for, let's say, writing a recommendation or having less time for office hours or something like that. My calendar became more full when I got tenure. I have more stuff on my calendar, so I can't be as charitable. So it could be like that. Or it could be the other way around, is that the junior faculty should be more busy and they should be prioritizing their career because before they start contributing long lasting, building things institutionally, that's not always the best course of action because you're building stuff, but you might not be there next year, right? So you have to a little bit prioritize your own development. However, as you said, younger faculty, they should be more active in research. They know what's happening in the field much more. They know what's happening in the industry much more. If you're in a field like computer science or, I don't know, chemistry, right? So these are the folks that are just, they're much closer to being a graduate student. They may be much closer to working professionally. And so they may have a different kind of bandwidth and different kind of resources available for you as a student.
Yeah, I completely agree. I want to ask you one question. Tell us what's a university professor as distinct from a regular professor.
So far, we covered the frequent ranks. And you mentioned a few. There are a few kind of more rare and maybe more esoteric. One of them is university professor. So here's another thing that students should understand is that the professor's job or the tenure track line and a lot of the day-to-day appointments, they lie within the department. So even though we all work for the university, like my immediate colleagues are very department oriented. It's quite unusual. It's not like a corporation where you may be in a team or you're in a department and then reports back. We're not like exactly hierarchical. So within the department, our service, our first and foremost kind of life professionally happens within the department. And that also means, by the way, I know I'm getting off track a little bit. The university may be very wealthy, or poor, but the department may be very poor or wealthy. Point is, just because the university is in a particular way doesn't mean that the department has the same kind of resources. So that's like a strange, that it's a good thing to understand. If you ever, as a student, if you're frustrated, like, why doesn't the university so wealthy? Why doesn't the department have copy paper? The department has its own budget. The department has, it can be managed or mismanaged. It can also be it can be marginalized within the university, and therefore not really be getting adequate resources. And they're themselves frustrated that they would like to give their students more services. They would like to have more teaching assistants to make more hours available for, let's say, some kind of support for homework, but they just can't. And look, nobody's going to sit down and go through the budget with you, but it's the kind of pressures you should understand. Now, to return to your question, So the ranks we've been talking about, they progress through the department, right? Assistant professor, associate professor, and then you get promoted to professor, which is really, there's not a huge difference between associate professor and professor. They're both tenured, and it comes with maybe a modest salary increase. Really, it's just more of a matter of prestige. Now, if you become a university professor, it means you have now transcended the limitations of your department. And that's why I spoke so much about the department. It means that you're no longer just have your home in a single department. You are now so cool and so wise, and the scope of your research is so important that you are able to teach on a university level. It's quite rare. I think, like at Columbia, we may have, it's probably like maybe a dozen or so, maybe less. Out of hundreds of faculty, there's probably like a dozen or so university professors. And I know in our department, there you can count them like on one hand, just historically. We have one colleague in particular who is a university professor. She's really famous. She's really prominent. It means her travel schedule is way crazier than my travel schedule. It means that if this person is your advisor, you will have a difficult time getting into the office hours, and you'll have to go through like a secretary, because that person is like, their time is booked. They're giving lectures worldwide. They're holding audiences and consulting sessions with many people. You can imagine their inbox. If I get anywhere between 10 and 50 emails per day, they're getting 500. They're getting and random requests. It's people from all over the world who message you and go, "Hey, what do you think about my recent book? What do you think about this event? Can you please comment on the recent state of whatever research?" And that becomes a part of their job and their responsibility. So that's the university professor. You're right, that's a cool title, unusual.
Yeah.
So what is your advice? So now that you know this, I'm saying, like, if you're a student, now you're like, wow, there's these different ranks and they mean different things. What does it mean in terms of selecting your classes? And what does it mean in terms of selecting your advisors? Like, practically, what would you advise there?
I think I would advise that students take classes that seem most interesting to them and
Mm,
would provide the best educational experience. That need not mean that the professor's rank is that important. Um,
mm,
Choosing which
yes,
classes to take, I would not look to the professor's rank as the most important factor. I would look to the content of the class. And if you wanted to ask fellow students or online repositories of these things, you could look at the professor's reputation as a teacher and make your decision based
right.
on that. But I don't think rank is very important for the selection of classes.
Yeah.
Because it's the
Mhm.
university, everything is supposed to be done at an appropriate level, and especially with all of the measures in place to review people all the time, whether it's a contingent faculty getting renewed yearly or junior faculty going through departmental review every couple of years, the university is ensuring a high quality of classroom teaching. So I would just follow your interests as you choose which classes to take.
Yeah.
Um, in selecting an advisor for, let's say, an undergraduate thesis, I would think about which professors you have found most resonant with your interests again, and who might be able to commit to advising you. You might want to start speaking to them at the end of your third year of undergraduate studies or at the beginning of the fourth year, just to assess, do they really have bandwidth to take you on as a student? For graduate studies, I think my recommendation would be pretty much the same insofar as which classes to take. But then I would start to get a little tactical in thinking, what's my field of study? Who might I
Mm,
choose to be on my dissertation committee? Maybe I'd like to take some classes with those people just to get the flavor of what they're doing, and then begin developing those pedagogical relationships. I would probably make the recommendation to choose as a main advisor for a PhD somebody who has a fair degree of job security. What do you
right.
think?
Yeah. I think it's important to diversify. So the mistake I see often undergraduates do this and graduate students do that in a major way is that they go after the famous, usually famous and senior faculty member, not realizing that person, first of all, they have the most students probably because they're influential and they're famous. And they also have the least time because they have all these commitments. They're no longer just doing departmental stuff. They're now being prominent in the field and internationally and so on. And so people will there's certain type of student who begin they just only want to take courses with like famous senior faculty. But I would say diversify because there's different strengths. And like you said, the you want to make sure that you get the full academic experience and you draw on the strength of different people at different stages of their career. So the younger person may have more time for you. A junior faculty may be actively looking for research students and they're looking to build some kind of research environment. And they would give you all the time in the world and they only have one other student. So they really can give you the type of feedback on your papers, on your proposals, on your recommendations in a way that the senior faculty cannot. But the senior faculty has more connections. And you see how the different strengths so therefore, diversify. Don't be afraid to take classes with younger faculty. Don't be afraid to take classes with graduate students because they're amazing. They're already, everybody, as you said, has gone through multiple levels of vetting, and the university maintains a level of excellence that everybody is expected to meet. So draw on a different strength of people in different stages of their career, diversify, as a graduate student, for example, if you're assembling a dissertation committee, have one senior faculty, have one more junior faculty, have someone who just started, and they'll be able to give you very different kind of feedback. It ensures that you get the benefit from also look a difference in age as well is significant, right? Somebody who went through graduate school in the 70s and in the 80s will have a very different kind of advice who just finished graduate school and freshly understands that what has changed, for example. So
Yeah.
yeah, my advice would be don't chase after clout, don't chase just after famous people, and diversify your support, your advising structure as an undergraduate, as a graduate. We'll conclude on that, but maybe that's my final piece of advice is that part of your job as an undergraduate, as a graduate student in the universities, you're building that support structure that follows you throughout, like for a long time. Even after you graduate, I have students who are like asking me to write recommendations for like their third job,
Wow.
right? And if they're academics, it's a lifelong relationship and connections and networking, but not in the gross way networking. It's truly like you're making an intellectual professional connection, hopefully that will last for a long time, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of what you do in the university. So and part of your job is to build that support network. And that support network, it shouldn't be just one person. It should be a diverse support network. It should be multiple people. We have librarians who can also be helpful for a long time in your research. There are staff members. There's mental health support. And then there's academic and professional support. So you're building, think of it as it's like Olympic training camp. And you want coaches that are good at different aspects of what you do. You have like conditioning coach, you have, I don't know, nutritionist. You're building that. You're building a diverse support network who can address various aspects of your education and of your career. Think about it in terms of a team rather than, oh, I'm gonna go to this university and work with this one faculty member. I think that's a mistake. And also it's a little bit in itself a precarious choice because if that faculty member leaves or it doesn't work out, all of a sudden you're in some new place and you don't really have other support structures to help you through. And maybe that's how we should leave today is that we should talk about applying to school as an undergraduate, applying to school as a graduate student, I think related to the conversation we had today are the various mistakes and the various successful strategies we see people do as they're looking forward to joining a university, joining teaching and the research community in a new place. So maybe that will be a great topic of conversation for next time.
Yes, I
What
love
do you
that.
think?
Yeah, applying to
Okay.
diversity. That's a great topic.
Let's do that. Let's do that. Yes. And folks, and I hope that a little bit also explains our purpose. We're trying to open up the black box of the university and talk about some of how it works from the inside so that you can make better decisions in your academic journey, wherever it leads you and at whatever stage of that academic journey you are. Please, I was thinking that to further that, please comment on our videos. We'll make a more formal way to contact us with questions, but we would love to hear the kind of things that you're struggling with. And if you have specific questions that you always wanted to be answered, we will try our best to address that in
It's office
future
hours.
episodes.
Yes.
Office hours.
It's
Yes, office hours for the world. All
yeah.
right. See you all around. All right, and see you soon as well. Bye.